Hey guys, what's happening? I'm Nick with Classic Nation, and today I'm going to walk you through my install of the Big 3 wiring upgrade in my 65 Impala that you see here. Now, the Big 3 upgrade is something that almost anybody can benefit from, but I'm going to walk you through the specifics of why you want it, how you install it, and all of the things that you're going to need. Stay tuned. All right, so let's talk about the Big 3 upgrade. The Big 3 upgrade is a really common upgrade that people make on their cars across the board, not just classic cars, but new cars as well. There is a lot of good reasons to upgrade and install the Big 3 in your vehicle. One of the reasons that you may want to do that is if you have an upgraded alternator. Alternators back in the day used to put out very little electricity to the rest of the car, and a common upgrade is to upgrade the alternator. I remember one of the most difficult things to deal with when I first got my car was really dim headlights. There would be times where the idle was low and the headlights would always be dimming, and so having a strong electrical system is key in some of these old cars. Also, people who have added different electrical components, be it a stereo with an amplifier, maybe air conditioning, any of those things add to the electrical draw on the car, and improving the original wiring is typically a benefit. So here's what it is. Upgrading the Big 3. What are the Big 3 things we're talking about? The first is upgrading the power wire from the positive post on the battery to the positive post on the alternator. That's the wire that charges. That's the wire that the alternator puts out power to the battery. So we're going to upgrade that, and we're going to upgrade it to with a bigger, thicker wire than the factory wire, which was a 10 gauge in my case, I believe. The second one is a ground wire, and in fact the rest of the upgrades are the ground wires. The ground wire from the negative on the battery to the chassis, that we're going to upgrade that. We're going to use the same size upgrade from that wire to that we did on the power side. So we're going to upgrade that. The next one that we're going to upgrade is going to be the engine block to the chassis. So those 3 wires are the Big 3 upgrade. Now, there's a lot of talk about calling it the Big 4 upgrade, and in fact I think that that's actually what it should be, and I'm going to do the Big 4 on mine, which is the last one, which is less talked about, but I think equally important. The last one is the negative side of the battery to the back of the alternator, or the negative ground on the battery, on the alternator itself. Now that's important because having a direct ground in the path of least resistance for the negative side of the alternator, which is the chassis of the alternator, back to the battery, really helps complete the circuit. In most installations, it may not be needed because the alternator itself is mounted to the engine block, and so the fact that it's grounded to the block, and the block is grounded to the chassis, and the chassis is grounded to the battery covers it. But having the path of least resistance and adding that additional wire can really increase the effectiveness of the electrical and charging system. Okay, so number one, on the Big 3, we're going to upgrade the power wire. I've selected a 0 gauge or a 1/0 here for my upgrade, and this may look overkill. I don't have plans to run a ton of stuff, but this is actually the size that is recommended when you're doing the upgrade. So one of the things to think about is I've decided to run what's called OFC wire, oxygen-free copper. It's the best connector. It's better than the alternative, which is CCA, which is a different type of copper-clad aluminum. So obviously if copper is a better conductor, this is the wire that you want to go with if you're going to do this upgrade. Bigger the better. Yes, this might be overkill for my setup, but I'm just trying to future-proof the setup. So this is the wire that I'm going to go with for that on the back of the battery. Now for all of the ground wires that I mentioned, I'm going to go with the same size. It's the same OFC wire in negative, and I got a black shielding on this just to make it easy to tell the difference. Going to do the same thing for the rest of the ground connections that I talked about. So that's the wire that you're going to need to do this. Now, there's a lot of debate on when you run the positive back to the alternator to the positive side of the battery, if you need to fuse it. Some people say yes, some people say no. The factory, in my case GM, for quite a few years didn't put a fuse in it, and then later they put a fusible link there. I'm going to put a fuse. I'm going to put what's called an A&L fuse in line in the engine compartment. I'm going to try to hide it and keep it obscure, but I am going to put a fuse. And the reason I'm going to do that is it just protects the wire. If anything ever shorts or touches, I don't want this thing heating up and melting and causing a fire in the car. Though it's unlikely that that would happen if you properly secure the wire, even an alternator that goes bad and shorts out internally could cause a fire and could cause that wire to heat up. So Anyone who's ever had an electrical fire looks for opportunities for ways to decrease that from ever happening again. And so for this case, I've chosen to use a fuse, and I'm going to use a fuse. The next thing that you're going to want is copper lugs, really high quality copper lugs to connect these wires to the battery and to all of the connection points both on the power and ground that you're going to be using. So obviously for zero gauge, I don't have any little hand crimpers that will crimp this. So what you're going to want to use is a legitimate crimp. You do not want these falling out. You do not want to just put these in a vise and smash them flat. You're going to want to use a proper crimp. There's a couple of crimping tools that you can pick up that are really inexpensive to be able to crimp those. I've got what's called a hammer crimp, which is this guy right here. This does a really nice job on bigger wire. I've run it on 4 gauge and 0 gauge. Does a really nice job crimping, so that's exactly what I'm going to use. When you're doing the Big 3 upgrade, this is the perfect time to take a look at your battery terminals and decide if those need to be upgraded or replaced. If they don't, perfect. If they do, you may want to take a look at a different type of battery terminal like I did here. I didn't like the corroded look of the original battery terminal. There's not very good spots to add additional wires to them. Always hard to get tight, always hard to make look right. So I've actually upgraded to these military style terminals. I got these because these are going to look really clean. You have the opportunity to add additional lugs and keep it clean in this wiring and be able to cinch it down really well. These aren't necessary, these aren't required, but these are the look that I want to go for to make the wiring really clean under the hood and add those additional 0 gauge battery terminals and lugs to the wire connections that I'm going to have. So definitely something to look into. One of the other options that I looked at was this style of battery terminal. I decided to go away from this because I didn't like how this wing nut was sticking up. I could have put a bolt there, but at the end I liked the clean look of the other ones that come with the cover, so I decided not to use this. Some other things that you're going to need: some high quality heat shrink. You're also going to want to use a heat gun to make those connections. This is really something that you don't want to skimp out on. You want to cover any bare wire, certainly on the plus side, make the wiring look really clean. So let's jump into the car, let's get it done. Okay, here we go. Step 1, most important step: disconnect the battery. Right here I'm taking off the negative terminal of the battery. You can also take off the positive just to be safe, but definitely disconnect your battery before you do any electrical stuff, especially because the wire to the alternator is a live wire, so you're not going to want to ground that out and shock yourself. Now that we have that off, it's the second most important step, which is find all your wires and figure out what the routing is going to be. Now, again, I say this is the most important step because this is really where you cut your wire to length and figure out how to put your wires in your engine compartment without making it look terrible and without putting it in a spot where it's going to be prone to getting hot or catching in something that's moving, which is something you want to try to avoid. So take your time in this step. I actually bring over the wire because I got a longer roll than what it needed, and I'm actually mocking up how much wire I'm actually going to need. But you can do this with a coat hanger, you can do this with a string. Figure out exactly what your wire routing is going to be so that you can get your wire lengths cut, and then it makes the whole rest of the job that much easier. So take your time here, plan it out, figure out how you're going to route it. Again, on the Big 3, something to note is most people leave their factory wires intact. Again, on these old cars, I'm taking the liberty of replacing the old wire, especially the positive that doesn't have a fuse. I'm just getting rid of it and going with all this new wire, but some people tend to keep their factory stuff intact. The other thing here is I'm figuring out where I'm going to go for the frame connection here from the battery, and I found a spot right below the battery on the frame, and so I'm going to hit everything that you're going to connect here, hit it with a wire wheel, get that nice bare metal so that that copper lug has a really, really good connection, and then clamp it down. Here's the fun part, ready to crimp. So get all of your wires. Once you have all those figured out, I'd say get everything measured and then start to get everything ready to be cut all at the same time. So you're going to want to get your wires cut to the right length, get all of your lugs, obviously matched to the wire size, and then just do all of them at once. That's what I'm doing here. So this bigger wire takes a little bit. You're going to want to twist it together. Try to get that lug on there. Again, for me, 3rd time's the charm. Takes a little bit, but you're not going to want any strands not in the actual wire lug there. You're going to want to take your time, make sure that every little bit of it is in that connection. And again, measure before you do this so that the amount of bare wire that you have showing out of your cable is exactly what needs to go into that wire lug. This style of wire lug has a closed end, so pretty easy to measure. Once you get that done, you can see underneath my hand there, I've actually got the heat shrink already. No, that's not necessary, but I've got it just because I don't like to try to fit it over these big wire lugs. And at that point, it's just putting it in the crimp, getting it positioned how you like it, and take a couple whacks at it. Try not to hit your fingers. You can also tell here I'm on the ground. Concrete provides a nice stable surface rather than doing this on your workbench. You can do it anywhere. But a couple of good hits here, and gets a nice crimp. Again, that last one almost got away from me, but there you go. And also, at this is the point where you give it a couple tugs and say to yourself, that baby's never coming off, which is an important part of making sure that you've got a strong wire connection. So there you go. Put the lug on. We'll give it a little heat on that heat shrink. Make sure the heat shrink is up just enough on that wire lug so that you got everything covered. Also, if you don't have a heat gun, totally fine. You can even do this with a flame. There's really cheap butane torches I've seen people use. A lot of different options here. Basically, the heat shrink, this is the adhesive kind that has the little glue inside, which I really like because it provides a better seal, and I just get a better feel when it's connected. One step that I like to do on my wires to make this extra clean is use some of this, what's called expandable loom. This is the old Chinese finger trap stuff. And I got a roll of it. It's 1/2 inch, which works perfect on the 0 gauge. And I'm going to use this just to make the wires a little prettier. Right now they're just bare wires, right? You can see the black, you can see the connections there. But by using this, it gives it a nice kind of a custom finished appeal. And I like it, so I'm doing this on all the wires here. You basically snake it over the top of your wire. A couple little tricks, because if you cut this stuff, it'll start fraying like crazy. But you cut it, and I always put a little piece of tape on the edge right before I cut. That way it's nice and clean. The deal with this stuff is that it doesn't provide, this particular kind that I have anyways, doesn't provide any kind of like heat barrier at all. It doesn't help with heat. It's all about looks and maybe a tiny little bit of abrasion resistance. But really it's for the looks department more than anything else. So I get the end tape, and actually I tape both sides on a fresh on the fresh side where I'm trying to keep it pulled nice and tight. Put a little piece of tape and then shear it off. Get yourself a nice clean little cut. The other important thing is that you'll see here is when you tape this off, you're going to want to tape both sides so that you cut in the middle, and that way your next piece that you're going to use isn't already frayed. Just gets a little better for it. And again, make sure to grab your kids' craft scissors, not any actual legitimate scissors at this point, because it makes the job a lot more interesting. But trim it off, and at this point you could apply the heat shrink again like I did. I doubled up on the heat shrink. I don't need to show that twice, but really gets it a nice feel. And I did this for all of the wires. You can see here the grounds are super black. The reds, you can actually, the red wire, you can actually see the color through a little bit. That's just because it's that 1/2 inch braided loom. If you got a bigger braid, it wouldn't expand so much, and it would show it wouldn't show the red color. But I don't mind it at all. I just wanted to cut the red color down a little bit. So the wires here that you're looking at, I have obviously the power wire in the middle. There's 2 sections because I have the connections to the fuse. I have the ground going to the alternator here. I have the ground that's the engine to chassis, and then I have the battery to the frame there, to chassis on the right. So it's 4 wires, and then now it's all about putting them in the car. So I pre-assembled the fuse just so I could kind of mock that up, but now it's basically put everything back in the way that you had thought it was, the way that you had planned. And if you have too short of wire at this point, it's because you cut something wrong and you didn't figure it out correctly. But in my case here, I didn't want this to be really obvious. I wanted it to be a little bit obscure, even though it is huge wire and obvious for anybody who's paying attention to it. But it was important to me to kind of route it behind things. So you can see me going behind the wheel well there, between the fender, and I'm going to be hugging it up really closely to the firewall. I'm going around that transmission dipstick for now because that transmission isn't going to be in there for too much longer. But it was important to me not to just dangle it over the front of the engine compartment and make it look really, really obvious. Because, again, it doesn't belong on a classic car. And so, again, that part is looking really good. The other thing that I picked up that makes the job a ton easier when it comes to organizing the wires is these little nylon wire holders, retainers, these clips. Again, up against the firewall and places, these keep it really secure and they make the wire not move around at all. So you can see here the connection on the alternator I was really proud of. I tucked that wire up beneath the fuel rail there. So it's almost impossibly hidden, which is good. It's away from heat sources, and then it goes around behind. On the other side of the alternator, you can see the routing of the ground wire there. I kind of have it going down around the intake across the front. It's nice and it's tight, it's obscure, hard to notice underneath there. And then again, I just have it routed on top of that radiator shroud with a couple of those wire nylon clips, and then I'm going to obviously not have it dangling over top of the battery, but it's going to route just in front of it out of sight. But you can see the finished product here, got everything together really nice. Those covers just give it a nice finished appearance and something I was really happy with. And again, you can see the copper down there on the frame connection. So overall, really clean install. I'm happy with how it turned out, and again, this looks a lot better than it did before. There you guys go. Done with the Big 3, Big 4 upgrade on my car. Again, this isn't a needed upgrade if you have a stock car. Certainly if your numbers matching, Concours restoration, you don't need to do this. But for anybody else who's upgraded your alternator, you have additional power-consuming things in your car, be it a stereo, an air conditioning, some of those things, or you just want a better charging system in general, definitely an upgrade worth doing on your car. And putting the fuses in there might give you a little bit better peace of mind that you won't be burning your engine compartment up and having to look for a new car in the future. So hopefully this was helpful to you guys. If it was, consider subscribing to our channel. We drop a video every week, once a week on Friday, 2 p.m. Pacific time. We'd love to have you as a subscriber. So stay tuned. We'll see you in the next video. Thanks.